Anyway, while we're doing that, I just want to say hello. I'm Pamela Bush. I'm the founder of Wine Fair and the Vanguard, and I'm super excited for this panel. The idea originally was just to talk about Vermont, but then we decided to expand it to other areas of the country because it's pretty cool to see what's happening in states that are not on the West Coast. So with that, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who worked on this behind the scenes. I don't have any notes in front of me, so let me see if I can get all this. Barbara Tanis, who did our graphic design, Megan Saker-Mestrovich, who did the website, Caitlin Schreiner, who did all the social media, Michael Adrienne, who did all the video work, my neighbor Heather for helping out with a few things. And then, of course, the tech team, which is Jeanette Milwaukee and Destiny Garrett. So, and I would say my support animal, Seamus. Anyway, I'm going to get off. I just want to introduce Lee Campbell, who I have known for a long time, and she's been in the wine business an even much longer time, based on the East Coast. You shaking your head. Anyway, but no, Lee is someone like
50 years old.
Yeah, because like everyone should know Lee. But yeah, Lee is currently is consulting with Early Mountain Vineyards in Virginia and has a number of other projects which she can tell you about. So thank you all. I'm gonna work on trying to get Deirdre in and enjoy yourselves.
Great. Yeah, if I click on the moderation panel, it doesn't really do anything. So I'm sorry not to be able to get Deirdre in right away, but I'm sure she'll join us too sweet. So just to recap, I'm Lee Campbell. I've been in the wine industry, the hospitality industry for a really long time. I went to college in Virginia, at which time the wine was not that great, although there were, always burgeoning producers doing interesting things like Horton. And then later on, when I got into the wine business in New York, the only Virginia wine that I knew about was basically Horton and Barboursville. And then about 2 years ago, I went to Virginia, and it was like this whole world had exploded, and I had no idea what was going on. It was exciting. It was overwhelming. It was quite thrilling. And then to find some real soulful friends down there who were working in some really interesting ways, like our winemaker at Early Mountain, Ben Jordan, to know that Erin Scala, of all places, had left New York City to go to Virginia was really exciting. And so I am working with this vineyard down there called Early Mountain, and we have a lot of fun down there with different experimental projects and always sort of exploring what we can do to push Virginia winemaking forward. And because of that, I have now taken a different eye to the rest of the United States, and I'm looking at states and really considering places that I never thought about before: Pennsylvania and Ohio and Maryland and Missouri. Of course, Texas, we've heard about for ages. Of course, we've been hearing about the work that Deirdre's been doing in Vermont for the last several years. So we just wanted to bring a few of us together to talk about the different currents and to talk about what's exciting, what we're excited about, and what we need to be talking about, what we need to be putting into the forum. So we have a few wonderful women here joining us. Some are on the winemaking side, some are on the hospitality side, some are on both sides. It's very exciting. And lots of combined knowledge and information. So I am hoping to learn as much as you all are hoping to learn. And also I'm hoping that this can be sort of a shared group discussion where maybe I can kind of get us to the finish line, but we'll all be sort of joining together. Okay, so I wanted to start by talking to Pascaline, also because Pascaline is at Racine right now, which is the restaurant where she's a partner, and she might have to scoot at any moment. There could be a Sauvignon emergency on the floor at any time. So we have to account for that, and I want to get her in first. Pascaline, hello, how are you?
Anything I can do for you?
Hi everybody.
And Pascaline has a really interesting background because she does actually come from a winemaking area, a historically prominent winemaking area in France, the Loire Valley. Pascaline, you're from the Anjou, correct?
Yeah, I'm not born in Angers, but I grew up in the Anjou region, and I all my winemaking early days, I've been directly involved in all the kind of Anjou producer, including like people that we saw today, like Evelyn, and I thought Agnès was also on. But I swear I learned about wine around Angers at a blossoming time for biodynamic, organic, and natural wine. So it's how I learned. Yeah.
Fantastic. And, you know, I've been hearing stories. I heard some stories back in the day from Terry Puzzola. I've heard more recent stories from Lucy Morton, who works with us down in Virginia as a viticulturist, about some of the illegal hybrids that are all over France, but we know are in pockets of the Loire Valley. Did you come across those as you were traveling around or coming up in the Loire?
Yeah, you still have a little bit of them, especially some old varieties of Gamay Teinturier, so like colored flesh. But hybrids have been hunted in France since 1935 in a very active way by the government. So kicked out of the legislation for appellation wine, so AOC's date from 1935. You have to understand that in 1953, just after the war, France was roughly 1.5 million hectares planted of vines, so twice the current surface, and 500,000 was hybrids. So we don't realize that in 1953, hybrids were so important in France, but the hybrids we are talking about are what we call HPD, so the hybrids created during phylloxera, which were focusing on high yield production. And we're planted for local consumption, for family consumption. Like the size of estate at that time was 0.8 hectares in France. So we had more like 1.4 million people declaring harvest in France in 1953. And so all these guys were hunted by French government until roughly the 1970s, where they managed to pull out roughly 95% of the hybrids.
Wow.
So it came up at the very, very end of the movement with the idea of hybrids couldn't make quality wine, and we had to replant vinifera. And so, yes, you had a little bit of here and there, Muscadet and everywhere, but they were really, I'm talking about couple of vines here and there. So hybrids, I rediscovered the extraordinary world of hybrids and complex world of hybrids coming to the US, and more than that, starting the project of chëpìka.
So, you know, I would have always thought that your first winemaking project would be a Chenin-based project, probably in France, maybe in the New World, but I would have thought it was Chenin. How on earth did you decide to get involved with hybrid grapes in the Finger Lakes district?
Because I was looking for organically certified wine to pour at the restaurant I was working for in New York. So my previous job was about promoting health through food. And so by sourcing the highest quality product, which means a certain way of farming, as we all know, to get the higher nutrients and taste. Easy thing to say for food, I would say, because America, especially being around New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and all that, is a real beautiful garden of vegetable and access to meat and fish and all that. And wine, we have a very strong history of wine, as you all know, but finding local wine was easy, but finding organic or biodynamically certified wine was a different story. And we also all know that because a lot of the diseases that are affecting the wine world are from this very specific part of the world and are affecting Vitis vinifera. So I was looking to kind of combine not only the locavore and the localism, but also the extra step in terms of the farming side, because, you know, it's often the idea of how can you offer something that has all the values that you care for, and is one more important than the other? And we're all talking about that today. Is the social part more important than the environmental side, and is it more important than the economical side? We all know that at the end they all work together. So how can we, when we have one of them, find the way to get the two others work also hand in hand? So it's hard to study.
And for chëpìka, your project with Nathan, are these from parcels that Nathan is farming, or are you all working with farmers?
So the only way we were to find organic grape in the Finger Lakes or even in New York was very complicated. There is a couple of people trying in Long Island and in Hudson and in the Finger Lakes, and in first we wanted to work with a farmer and to work with him to convert. And honestly, I have to say we owe a lot to Deirdre, because without Deirdre's inspiration, and I was working with a wine before starting chëpìka, and I had no idea about the potential of hybrids before Deirdre's wine started to be shown on the market. And I would have never probably gone that road with so much passion and conviction that it was possible. And so we decided with Nathan, okay, let's find let's find a grower, because Nathan doesn't own any vineyard. Let's find a grower that is ready to convert. Vinifera, impossible. Let's go to hybrids. We had one person, we started to talk with him, and he gave up very quickly after we started to talk about him. And so Nathan went on a hunt and find that family-owned farm, certified organic since 1971, that happens to be 10 minutes drive from Nathan, that he knew from before the project. And they were already selling this grape we're working with, organically certified as table grapes. And we talked to them about the project, and they were okay. So we are not farming, and we don't pretend to be farmers at all for these grapes. And they are farming in a very interesting way. They are still farming these grapes to be table grape. So the yield, the pruning, all that was done. I can go into details, but the project about chëpìka was to say you can make the greatest wine in the world with hybrids. It was to say you need to reconsider your local biosystem and ecosystem. And if you care enough about the making side, the cultural side, the human intervention side, while you are dealing with grapes that have been planting here for a while. So the chëpìka grapes have been, the vineyard we know has been planted in the early 20th century. We think that the vineyard has been planted in the early 1910s. So there is a legitimacy of this very specific vitis growing there, still surviving, still alive. So yield are not overly controlled. Farming is really hands off, and it's a farm. So they're growing a bunch of different crops, and there is cattle and all that. It's isolated. And we are just on the side of the winemaking side. And our goal is not to make the most crazy terroir, like I wouldn't say terroir, because I don't think you can make chëpìka anywhere else. As soon as you think terroir is way more than just your geological soil, it's way more than that. But we want to show that there is things that were here before us, and they have been here, and they have been resilient. And if we respect them, we can make something that can make sense, can be good, can be enjoyable, and also can be affordable. And that's how we see how to revive the past history of the Finger Lakes, with 75% of the planting still being these hybrids. That's the chëpìka project. So it's really more an economical, political, and sociological project to say that we need to reconsider what surrounds us and appreciate it for what it is.
Thank you. Erin, let's jump in a little bit and just bounce around, talk a little bit about history, talk a little bit about Virginia history. We can talk about some of the historical plantings of the other regions that we're going to be talking to. I thought it was very interesting that number one, as we said, Texas, Virginia, both their first historical plantings were in the 17th century, in the 1600s. Obviously, someplace like Vermont was much more recent. New York was quite a long time ago as well. Do you see any through line between the earliest vine plantings in each of these areas and what the culture of the place is now, especially someplace like Virginia, where you are every day? I mean, if Virginia first planted in 1607, does that translate to what the industry?
I don't think so, because of Prohibition. I mean, when you look to pre-Prohibition wine history in the United States, you really can't disassociate it from colonialism. And it's all of those early wineries from the 1500s to the 1600s to the 1700s. I mean, they're all attached to some really kind of ugly things in the history of the United States. And then Prohibition sort of made a clean break from a lot of that. And it's interesting because when you look at the mid 1800s, there's actually all of these hybrids being grown in the United States, especially in the Southeast corridor, and they're being made into wines, and they're actually sold in famous wine shops in big markets in the United States, in New York City, in some of the bigger markets in the Central South, and also in San Francisco. And a lot of hybrid wines were sold alongside of wines of the Rhine and the Mosel, again, the mid 1800s. And they were sold along some of the most famous wines in the world. So the hybrid hate that didn't really start until the phylloxera epidemic. And one thing I actually wanted
we were so proud of the Norton grape throughout the 19th century in Virginia. It won many medals in places like Austria.
Yeah, in fact, the World's Fair that they built the Eiffel Tower for, Norton won a big prize. So if you were seeing the unveiling of the Eiffel Tower, you might also have drunk a Virginia Norton that was farmed in the Shenandoah Valley. But again, Prohibition cut all that short. So there was the phylloxera epidemic and Prohibition. And one fascinating thing that that I wanted to sort of piggyback on what you were saying, Pascaline, was that all of the laws that are sort of anti-hybrid, it seems like they don't apply to rootstock in any way. But then there's no like wording in the law that's like we don't like hybrids, but except for rootstocks, all rootstocks. Isn't that kind of weird? Like I've never seen a rootstock written in law or something like that. But anyway, no.
Without rootstock, you would have any vineyard in Europe right now. So the rootstock story. We can go on and on forever. It's a highly more political things that we know in France.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that many hybrid plantings were also on rootstock. I want to talk to Deirdre about that a little bit later on because I feel like she is the hybrid queen and she can tell us all about this. Adrienne, I'd love for you to jump in and tell us a little bit about your background. You only went to Texas a few years ago, right? 2016?
I moved back in 2013.
Okay.
And I grew up in Austin. So I never really pictured coming back to Texas, especially when I decided to move into winemaking, which was back in 2009.
Where were you before that?
So I went to Davis. So I moved to California to do my undergrad. And then before officially moving to California, I was in Walla Walla, Washington, where I did my first vintage. So coming back to Texas was not a plan for me. I had tasted a little bit of Texas wine when I was before I went to Davis and was not excited about it. What brought me back to Texas actually was a brewery outside of Austin that was starting a barrel aging program and starting to do fruit re-fermentations with their beers. That was Jester King Brewery. And so I moved back in 2013. I had intended on doing just a 6-month apprenticeship to sort of take the place of Southern Hemisphere Harvest, and ended up staying there for 3 years running that program. And it was during my time at Jester King that I got to meet a lot of winemakers out here in the Hill Country, started working with them on sourcing some grapes for some co-ferments with beer. And it was during that time that I was really starting to be impressed by what was going on in Texas. A lot more thoughtful winemaking, a lot more thoughtful viticulture, just seeing it going in a positive trajectory. So when I decided to leave beer and go back to wine in 2016, made the decision to stay here and just dove right in.
So, we've been hearing, I will say that if I recall back to my sommelier class days, sommelier certification days, certain things always stick out. Hill country of Texas, that's all you learned about Texas. It was hill country and that was it. And then you moved on to like the other 3 or 4 states that they cared about. Likewise, when I think of the hybrids I always learned about, it was Seyval Blanc, it was Baco Noir, it was Vidal, there was Maréchal Folk for some reason. I don't know why, but but there were always these things that these boxes that they would check. But hill country was always one of them. I was always fascinated with it. As you know, I came down to help run a wine festival there 2 years ago called Wild World in Austin. And that was my first intro to really meaningfully tasting those wines. And then, of course, all of the wines I was tasting were also natural. So that was like really trying to get my head around that. What was clear to me was that you have some really interesting soil formations, especially around limestone. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? There was a special name for the limestone down there, as I recall.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the coolest things about the area we're in. The Hill Country AVA, I believe it's the second largest AVA in the US. So it's about, I think it's 8 or 9 million acres. I mean, Texas is big.
And we want to just remind everybody who's listening, Texas, you know, you can look at about 5 or 10 different lists about production levels in the United States of wine. Texas usually comes up around number 5 in terms of production. You know, after the 3 on the West Coast, New York is actually ahead of Oregon, and then Texas is generally number 5. Virginia is usually 6 or 7, and I don't know where Vermont is, Deirdre.
I don't know either.
So you've got some special soils there, limestone, clay.
Yeah.
You've got some really interesting aquifer systems. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Hill Country is primarily sitting on the Edwards Plateau. So it is very hilly here. I mean, there are parts of the Hill Country where we have just like incredible canyons that are quite steep. And our elevation change, I mean, we go from around 400 to, I think, up to around 2,200. Wow. So there's a pretty big change. And a lot of different soil structures. I've talked to a couple growers that have thrown out around 50 different like varying soil structures in the Hill Country. And I mean, like at Southold, for example, we're up on a pretty high hill, really sitting on a lot of limestone. The site in particular has a lot of flint and caliche, but just about
caliche is what I kept hearing about caliche.
Yes.
What is that? Can you tell me about that?
Caliche, to my understanding, it's more decomposed limestone, but they're very similar. And so where Southold is, just about 5 miles down the road, our friend is farming a vineyard that's primarily sandstone. It's just all decomposed sandstone. And then in the other direction, we're hitting heavier clay closer to the Pedernales, and that's like it's called Luckenbach clay out here. And then if you go kind of north of where we are, you hit granite. So there is this really interesting area in the northern part of the Hill Country where you have sandstone sitting on granite. It's quite varied out here. And again, it's vineyard sites that are within a mile of each other could be vastly different.
One of the things that we say in Virginia, and Erin, feel free to jump in here, is that the AVA system just feels really rudimentary at this point, that it doesn't really describe, AVA by AVA doesn't really have a whole lot of consistency in terms of terroir or approach, or even sometimes grape varieties. And so right now, at least, you know, at Early Mountain, we don't find the AVA system to be very descriptive or particularly helpful from either a marketing or sort of an educational point of view, because there's so much difference from, you know, parcel to parcel, AVA to AVA. Erin, do you hear them talking about that quite a bit?
Yeah, in fact, the AVA system in Virginia, even winemakers complain that when it was first created, it was kind of more political than it was tied to geology and geography. And so it's weird, like we do have these AVA systems that are loosely helpful, but I'm really interested to watch subregions emerge. And oftentimes when I talk with winemakers, they'll say it's too early. You know, we need to have like a few more generations to really see our subregions here. So to me, I feel like I'm watching this movie, you know, and I'm maybe like in the first 20% of the movie, and I'm just seeing where it goes. I hope I live long enough to see the subregions.
Deirdre, so how many AVAs are there in Vermont? I don't know, is it one AVA?
I was just going to say, it is one AVA, and it's Vermont. However, we have just filed an application for the first subregion of Champlain Valley. And I think we'll see how that goes. Because I can see where vineyards are now, like where we are in the mountains, that area is called the Chateauguay. But then, of course, there's the Champlain Valley, there's the Champlain Islands. There are other little pockets where people are working, but it's a very lengthy and expensive process to apply for an AVA. And, it's exactly what Erin is saying, is that I think many of us feel like, wow, it's really early days. We know the predominance of vineyards here are in the Champlain Valley, so maybe that makes sense to pursue that AVA at this juncture. But I don't know, it'll be really interesting to see how that process goes and whether it's actually, if the timing is right for us to think about more or not.
Some of the research that Erin did said that the first plantings in Vermont weren't until 1997. Does that jive with what you understand?
Yes, that is correct.
Was that you?
Yeah. No, it wasn't. There was there were a handful of people who were part of what I would call the first wave of Vermont wine growers. And they were really the people who put in the infrastructure. And they were coming from two different worlds in a way. On one hand, there were a group of former dairy farmers who were trying to keep land in the family and to find a crop that had a value-added product so they could pay their taxes, keep the land in use. So that was sort of one movement. And then you had another movement of people who were business folks who were retiring, who loved what they were seeing in, say, California, and thought that, okay, that could be interesting. Maybe we could duplicate something like that in Vermont. Let's put in a winery and a tasting room and, see how that goes. So there were those sort of those two camps that started. And those were the folks who were planting in 97, 98, and 99. And many of those vineyards are still existent now, but not in the same hands. Some of them are, but many of them have moved on to other people, which is
you came along in 1999. Is that correct?
Well, I came into Vermont in the restaurant world in 1996. I didn't start planting until 2007. So, and then my first official release was in 2010. So I didn't even really know that any of that was going on until maybe 2005. You didn't know that there were wineries in Vermont. It just wasn't part of everyday life.
Where do you come from? Where are you from?
So I'm originally from Southern Indiana.
Okay.
Which actually now has a couple of wineries and
right.
Some vineyards out there. But at the time, that wasn't, when I was growing up there, that wasn't something that was happening. And I came to Vermont for college, then lived and worked in New York City, and then had this opportunity to live and work in Italy. And that was what changed my trajectory to food and wine. But I remember my first year living in Italy and thinking and becoming enamored of vineyard spaces and thinking, well, if I move back to Vermont, I'll never be able to do that there. So,
and where in particular were you in Italy? Was there a place that you spent more time than the others?
So in Italy, we were in central Tuscany, actually right on the border with Umbria. In a tiny little town that was not very touristed. So that was great for us in terms of our experience. But that was very informative. And that was in, when was that? That was 91 and 92 that I was there the first time. And then again in 95. Yes, because then we came back and we opened.
Was the first vinification, viticulture and vinification experience that you had, was that at your own estate, or did you train somewhere else?
I learned in my bathtub. So yeah, no, I didn't train anywhere else technically. The one advantage I think I had was as a wine director at the restaurant that I shared with my husband. I had access to a lot of different producers, and I was really able to create kind of my own faculty. And I had mentors that, I would go and visit to taste for the restaurant, and I'd say, well, I have this kind of crazy project that I'm working on. And people would get really interested and excited about it, and were really happy to teach me, everything that they could. And I was like a sponge, and, tried to pocket all of that. So by the time I was ready to start working with fruit here in Vermont, I felt like I had some things to pull from. But
and the first vines, what's the first varieties that you planted?
The first varieties I planted were Marquette, Saint Croix, and Frontenac Gris and La Crescent. Those first four.
So that's interesting. You're in Vermont. You're not far from upstate New York. You're not far from Cornell.
Yeah.
But you decided to plant Minnesota hybrid varieties.
Yeah, and that was something that the people who came before me, those were the Minnesota varieties were largely the varieties that were planted in the vineyards here. So when I started, and I planted my vineyard, but I started working with another grower's fruit. He had Marquette, Frontenac Gris, Brianna, and La Crescent, and Frontenac Noir. So those were the things that I had available to work with. And, I'm not sure quite why the relationship between Vermont and University of Minnesota became so strong as opposed to Cornell. Because there has been some involvement in what's going on here, or at least in the early days from Cornell. But those varieties people seem to be interested in them, maybe mostly because of their flavor profiles or the potential they thought they had. So that's what got planted. And I found them incredibly interesting, and, was very happy to continue on with those same varieties. And I think I grow 7 now. I've added a couple to those original 4, but yeah.
Well, speaking of flavor profiles, Pascaline, you are working, I know, with Catawba, with Delaware. Are there other varieties that you all are working with?
Yes, we're gonna have a new wine this year with a new another variety. But so far we have been reworking with Catawba and Delaware, which is only the 2 grapes I can talk about, and especially Catawba, because we are just making 2 versions of it, the sparkling and the still. So it's the one I know a little bit better.
People consider Catawba to be a little foxier, correct?
Yeah, from the aromatic profile to the structure to also the look of the variety itself. When you look and you're in a vineyard, Delaware, you could confuse it with a Vitis vinifera. Well, the way that Catawba is falling apart, there is no the whole viticultural side of Catawba. You recognize the very, very strong DNA of Labrusca in a grape without a doubt. So yes, you have that the foxy molecule, if you want, coming through, especially when it's on the very riper side. Which once again, it helps us to realize that taste is an acquired thing. It's a cultural thing. I was very happy, Erin, a couple of weeks ago forwarded me an amazing poster from 1854. Where she was really what she was talking about, the greatest claret, and 1854 was a bit older, in fact 1834 Marco and all this kind of thing. And this poster was advertising sparkling Catawba. So it was nice. That at that time, at least Catawba was highly in demand, at least on Chamber Street in New York. So yes, you have the taste. And it's quite strong, but when it's vinified like we do on the early side and picking side, making the sparkling wine, it's more subtle without losing its thing. And we want people to taste Catawba, so Catawba has to taste like Catawba. And I'm very sorry. I have a wine to taste from service.
That's okay. We'll come back to you, Erin. you know, both you and Pascaline, you know, are able to introduce people on the service side to your wines and to really see in real time how they're reacting to some of these wines. When you introduce people to hybrids, and I know in Virginia, it's still early days, and we talk a lot about Chambourcin, we talk a lot about Vidal, we're starting to get into Noiret and to Chardonnay and a few others. Do they notice that there's a distinctive flavor difference, or are we able just to segue right along and they don't even notice? I mean, partially because we're picking grape varieties that are a little less foxy, a little less funky.
I slide them in under the radar, personally. I think that biodiversity in the vineyard for many different species of grapes is so important in the long term of vineyard sustainability. Like, not so much for us, but I don't know, for 500 years from now. And so, and I do think that a lot of the hybrid hate comes from the phylloxera epidemic, and it's just sort of like carried over in these like weird cultural ways. And so I just try to pretend it's not there and list hybrid wines right alongside of vinifera wines, no problem. And most people don't know.
Right. And then, I mean, maybe Chambourcin is a little bit different than Catawba. I mean, Pascaline, when people taste the Catawba, do you see a different sort of look on their face? Do they react any differently, or does it really depend on what they're eating, what they're drinking, what you're pairing it with?
So I just want to say that hybrids are way more complex words than just hybrids. Like there is a history of hybrids. The hybrids I'm working with, the Catawba, is not necessarily the Maréchal Foch, and it's not the Marquette and the Frontenac. There is a massive evolution in hybridation of the grapes and how much of the DNA of the grapes is coming from certain type of vitis. The fact that the monopoly
and some
of
people
taste
would even prefer to call it multivitis at this point than hybrids, which is sometimes,
absolutely. There is a lot of debate about how to call that today, and what are the idea behind the original idea is to make sure we could grow these grapes in climate and environment that was very hostile to vinifera, whatever is America and then to Europe. And so there is a massive history, and you can't compare this grape. I can't compare Delaware to Norton, to Chambourcin, to Frontenac, to Créchant. It's a whole new alphabet. It's a whole new language I'm learning. And the same way I will discover a new grape variety coming from Georgia. That's it. And so you need to learn them, and some of them are going to be very aromatic. Some of them are going to have very strong presence. Some of them are going to be very strong structural elements. I think one of the backbone is really this very specific acid structure that we're not necessarily used to. We have no real history of how they age, except Norton, maybe in Virginia, which I think is one of the historical things that we can taste. And so we just need to be extraordinarily humble about that, and just not saying, you know what, it's just hybrid and just it tastes differently. No, as Erin says, there is a biodiversity, there is a history of how they react to certain terroir environment and winemaking we haven't been able to explore. Deirdre is doing something very specific in Vermont, in a particular microclimates, promoting this grape and doing this grape in very different style. You have the floor, you have the sparkling, you have the still. So I think a little bit of humility and also grabbing our chance. I think we are really looking at history being done. There is an incredible opportunity for so many things to happen. And instead of judging, you're like, that's really fantastic. And what can I do with that? What's the future for that? Does it make sense? And the sense is not our taste. Our taste is going to change. My taste today, the taste of the community, the cultural taste is going to change within 50 years. But does we offer us and the environment and viticulture a future by deciding to give their chance to these varieties that, you know what, are handling very well all the things we're fighting against when you're a winemaker. So it's a all different approach that you need to have, and I'm just embracing it. And it's not because I don't understand it or not like it that I'm not supposed to embrace it and to try to see where it can take us. And I'm very, very sorry. I've been beeped upstairs, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stay way longer.
That's okay. That's why I wanted to get you in early. You take off. If you can jump back in before 7:30, please feel free to. Okay.
I will definitely try in like 15 minutes if I can. I'm really, really sorry for that.
All right, hurry up. Deirdre, why don't you jump in there? One of the things that I've noticed as I learn more about the hybrids we're working with in Virginia is that, so many of the wines we're making down there from hybrids, if we can get people to get excited about them, I mean, when I say people, I mean producers, winemakers, they're very glue. They're very, fresh and styled, but you seem to be clear that you're making some glue wines, but also wines that have legs. Can you talk to me more about what you're doing in the cellar and how you think these wines can stand up to different types of élevage?
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding that these varieties are incredibly versatile. It's almost bizarre how they can take on the persona of stylistic changes in really interesting ways. I mean, as Pascaline mentioned, because of the high acid and that structure, sparkling is an obvious choice for a lot of the varieties that I work with. But especially with bottle age, still wines with these varieties can be really, truly beautiful. And I'm really excited about what we're working on now, which are, Solera and Flor aged wines, particularly with a grape called La Crescent, but also with the Marquette.
Do I have to say La Crescent? Because I've been saying La Crescent.
You know what? The first time I was at a wine fair in France, and I kept trying to speak my schoolgirl French, and I would say La Crescent, and everybody kept looking at me like, this is so strange. What are you talking about? A croissant? There's a grape variety called croissant. I'd be like, no, La Crescent. So yeah, I like that. I like that also, but La Crescent in our American lingo.
I'm from Poughkeepsie. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So, I've been really excited and impressed by what's happening with Flor, what's happening with this idea of Solera. We're doing Rancio, so we've got demijohns that sit outside for the summer in the hot sun, and because they've got this acidity and this structure, I think that they just can age and age and age and age. I would say we've got stuff going back, and this is not a terrifically long time, but to 2011, and things are really holding up beautifully. And that's one of the exciting things I think about working with these varieties, is that kind of the sky's the limit. There is no preordained style which is
also very American, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think of these as these are the American varieties. They are, a hodgepodge of all these different kinds of species of grapes, and then you've got different kinds within the species, particularly vinifera, and they're just big melting pots. So, I think that they say something particular coming from our culture, whether it's Vermont or Missouri or Virginia or, wherever else they're happening.
And at this point for your estate, how much is vinifera and how much is multivitis?
No vinifera.
So no Chardonnay anymore?
No, never had.
Never had Chardonnay. Okay.
Never had Chardonnay. I had a brief fling with Riesling and Blaufränkisch and even Melon. And I mean, the reality is that I couldn't grow them here the way I want to grow vines. If I wanted to bury them, get into geotextile, and treat them that way, I could probably get away with it. But I want the vines in my vineyards to grow like vines normally grow. So, after the first year of realizing that Riesling and Blaufränkisch weren't going to happen, I also found after that first year of making the wines and tasting the wines that I was so intrigued by the possibilities of what those wines offered in their flavor profiles that I thought, a lot of people can make great Riesling, but who's making great Marquette? Who's making, really terroir driven La Crescent? Who's working in the vineyards with respect and love in the same way that, someone in a more established wine region is working. And that was really exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adrienne, we haven't forgotten about you. I want to jump back in with you right now and talk about Texas. You're working with all vinifera, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
There are a couple of hybrids out here that I wouldn't say they've gained a whole lot of traction, but Blanc du Bois and Black Spanish are going to be sort of the main hybrids that Texas has focused on, especially the East Texas region. And then the Walker varieties are sort of starting to creep in here.
What are those?
They were actually, I worked on them a little bit when I was at Davis. I worked with Andy Walker's lab, and they're typically like 97 to 99% vinifera. And they were mostly worked on because their big thing is they're resistant to Pierce's disease, which is a very big issue in our area. And so I think these hybrids were really supposed to be like marketed to Texas. I know Dr. Walker came here quite a bit when they first came out to taste winemakers through these wines. And I think as of maybe a couple years ago, they're officially available through the nurseries. I know of at least one winery, maybe two, that have started planting them. I am really curious to see if they gain a little bit more traction out here. I think winemakers, well, of course, there's they're not pure vinifera, and how are we going to sell them to the customer? They're not recognizable names. So there's that. But I think also a lot of winemakers haven't had the opportunity to try wines made from these hybrids yet. So there's a lot of question marks. But I'm hoping that people kind of dive into using them because, again, PD is a huge issue out here. And we've considered using them at Southold. We've kind of talked to some nurseries, and I've talked here and there with Dr. Walker about him coming back out and tasting winemakers on these wines again and kind of restarting that conversation.
There's a couple of things I'd like to hear from you. I would love to know a little bit more about that interesting aquifer system that you have in Hill Country. And I also want to know what grape varieties you're espousing right now, especially given your relatively short growing season in Hill Country. So
yeah.
Have at it. Tell me.
That's a good question. I'll start with the varieties because that's something that just having a lot of conversations about right now. Southold is actually getting ready to plant some more acreage at the estate, and then planting a vineyard about 2 hours west of us, or I guess, yeah, about 2 hours. So Regan and I have been having a lot of conversations about what vinifera varieties are appropriate. From my experience working in Texas since 2016, I have been pretty excited about Portuguese varieties. Worked with Touriga Nacional and worked with some Tintacao back in 2016 and 2017. They are quite resilient, especially with our shorter growing season. What we see a lot of right now in Texas is Tempranillo, and I just don't know why that took off like it did. I mean, the vines, I know vineyard managers like working with Temp because it's just a lot more resilient, but the fruit really falls apart at the end of our season. You just get all your acid falls out if you're trying to get that big phenolic ripeness. And so many people out here are trying to make these like really big Spanish style Tempranillos. And in order to do that, they're just dumping insane amounts of tartaric acid in on the winemaking side. And it doesn't make any sense. It's making these wines that are like really off balance. So again, like Portuguese varieties I've seen hold up in the vineyard.
Does that include Portuguese white varieties as well?
So not a lot of Portuguese white varieties that I know about here, other than there are two vineyards that did plant Orinto, but they planted them just a couple years ago. So I haven't really seen any Orinto wines made, but very, very excited and curious to see kind of where that goes. So mostly Portuguese reds. There has also been a really big focus on Rhone reds in the Hill Country, and I've actually really enjoyed working with those varieties here.
I mean, I hate to harp on this, but I mostly drink white wine if left to my own devices. So, I mean, are there white grapes that you're excited about? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, there are.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I'm excited about. There's not a lot of white grapes grown in the Hill Country. So if we're talking about like what's country, that's kind of a big question mark. I was literally just talking about whites with Regan on Friday, and it's like one that I'm sort of curious about, and we've been talking about is Claret. And there are a couple people that have planted it in the Hill Country over the last 2 years. Again, haven't really seen many wines coming out of these sites that have planted whites yet, like Claret. Claret and Arinto have been the two that have been kind of intriguing, but most of what's planted here is reds. So,
and talk to me about that aquifer system that you have.
Yeah, the aquifer system is really fascinating here. I mean, we're sitting on an incredible like tunnel of aquifers, and like the property that I'm on right now, people have wells out here. So our well is only about 40 feet till you hit an aquifer. I think the one at Southold is almost, if Regan's listening, he might say no, but I want to say it's about 900 feet. So different properties, you're having different proximities to the aquifer system, but it's very widespread.
And so does that make dry farming feasible?
So Regan planted the vineyard in 2017. This is the vineyard Southold Farm and Cellar where I work, and the intent was to dry farm it. And it only planted rootstock in 27. It's all 110R. And I would say about 50% of the rootstock has become very well established without any irrigation. The other 50% very much struggled, and that other 50% is dead. We have put in irrigation. We did decide to this year. So I don't know anyone that dry farms in Texas, to answer your question. And I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think that if you're willing to put in a little bit more time into establishing your vineyard, then it might be. But the aquifer system is pretty far below, especially like we're on the hillside. So we're on a pretty big hill at Southold. So hitting that water table, it's going to take a little bit longer for those vines. But we did pull up some rootstock last year, and for being essentially babies, like they had very long root systems. I mean, we obviously were breaking them because we couldn't go as far down as we needed to, but we were getting like 2 feet easily. And so, I mean, vines are incredibly resilient. They'll find water. We do get about 24 inches of rainfall on average per year, but Texas is so inconsistent. And I think where dry farming gets really tricky out here is we will get, 5 years of drought. So that 24 inches is very much a loose average, I would say. I mean, this year it's been raining nonstop. We have a really wet season out of the get-go this year, and it's really hard on a lot of growers. But 2011 to, I think 2008 to 2011, it was so dry out here. If you were trying to establish a vineyard without irrigation, it would have been extremely difficult. I don't know if it could have been done. So again, it's just super big inconsistencies.
Are you working organically at Southold?
So right now it's just rootstock, and our inputs have been very low in the vineyard. So yes, and the plan is to continue to work organically moving forward. I don't know if we're going to be going for a certification, but implementing primarily organic and biodynamic practices, which is definitely a new thing for Texas. There are, Lewis Dixon from La Cruz de Comal might be the only certified organic vineyard in the state. The Robert Clay Vineyard, which is a site that we work with, implements a lot of organic practices, but is not certified organic. And pretty much everyone else is conventional farming. So that's kind of been a big focus of ours these past few years, is establishing relationships with growers and starting to have those conversations about changing vineyard practices.
Right. Erin, let's talk about Virginia a little bit. So when I went down there and I started asking questions, I think I was a little shocked that people weren't pushing for organics as much as I had hoped. I was very shocked that so few people were fermenting ambiently. And you know, I still stand by Virginia, and like I said, we're in the movie, and we're still in the first 20% of the movie. But where do you think this is going in Virginia? I mean, it can't just be like, you know, obviously there's a small group of growers that are really having these conversations, but there are almost 300 wineries in Virginia. We know that a bunch of those are just touristic projects, but do you think this is going to come up? Because I really feel like people are indignant about their yeast in Virginia. They're like, oh yeah, we inoculate and we're going to keep inoculating. Like they're not even like engaged in like the natural wine conversation. I mean, in some way it's kind of weirdly charming because they're just like, they don't have any, there's no shame about it. Do you know what I mean? Like in some areas you go and you almost feel like they're greenwashing. They're trying to like protect the story. They know what you want to hear, so they're trying to meet you in that weird zone. But in Virginia, they're just like, nah, that's crazy, you know?
Yeah, when I first moved here and would ask questions, like I would literally, people would roll their eyes and be like, and I would hear things like, oh, there's no way to even plant a vineyard without Roundup in Virginia. And I'd be like, maybe you're not planting the right grapes, or maybe you're not planting the right site, but something like I would hear things like this. And I think some of the sort of like first or second generation leaders are working with what they know and passing down knowledge about what they know. And these sort of community ways of thinking about how wine is made can get really ingrained. And it takes people to sort of shake it up a little bit to get people thinking about other things. And I think that's exactly what Ben is doing. And there's also other winemakers who do work with ambient yeast. They kind of proudly wear it, you know, and I love that. And because they're proudly wearing it, it makes other winemakers, they get the side eye. And then, but then
I mean, even I mean, not to trash talk or anything, but even Mathieu at King Estate, just in the 2.5 years I've known him, I've already seen like an amazing evolution. He was very protesting and strangely protesting at the beginning, but now you see him really experimenting, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's funny, like a lot of times when I do tasting groups, even with people that I'm close with, I just try and bring interesting wines and unique wines, and then I try and state like why I think they're interesting, and I'll say something like, and I really love the aromatic complexity from the ambient yeast, or something like that. Just all sort of like trying to plant a seed.
Yeah.
But it is like there's definitely I feel a change happening. I feel something happening. And another thing is that when people plant Virginia, a lot of people, we had that farm winery thing, same thing in New York, that encouraged a lot of landowners to sort of plant vineyards to get a tax break. And once that Farm Winery Act went in place in both those states, we see kind of explosive growth in the winery industry. And everybody, you know, say you're not a wine person and you're like, oh, I'm going to plant a vineyard and get the tax credit. So many people instantly think California Cabernet. And so everybody, you know, a lot of people tried planting Cabernet Sauvignon in Central Virginia, and it doesn't really work here. It works in some places in Virginia, but it doesn't really work in Central Virginia. And so nowadays people are saying, well, if you plant Cabernet, like they'll advise people, if you plant Cabernet, you're going to get Rosé every year. Maybe you'll get Cabernet Sauvignon 1 year. And so there's now this, like, whereas 10 years ago, we're going to copy the Napa model. Whereas now people are like, I wonder what will grow on this site. And there's more, like, I'm seeing a change and a shift in ideology in the community. And another part of that is I think because of the winemakers research exchange founded by a group of winemakers, and they would each do these like controls, and then they taste them double blind. And that, I think, has also made a huge difference in the community here, because before that, there wasn't this dialogue about, well, what do we do if there's like whole cluster versus skin contact? Then you get somebody doing a control experiment that's your friend, and you can literally taste the results, and you can take that back to your own winery and do whatever you wish with that.
You can take it to the bank is where you can take it. Yeah, no, I mean, Ben tells me about the experiments they do around, maceration, around yeast, around, it's very data-based, and I appreciate that, because I think people just think that they're shooting in the dark and like praying for the best, but the best winemakers in all of these regions are gathering data year by year and trying to figure out what works. So we have a few minutes left to chat amongst ourselves before we open it up and take some Q&A. So if you all want to start filling up the Q&A, but there's a term I want to throw out at all of you, and whoever wants to jump in and say whatever you want. But Selección Mezcal, is that a thing? Is that a thing in any of your regions? Yeah, Deirdre,
Yes.
what can you tell me?
Yeah, so well, I mean, I say it's a thing. It's a thing we're doing. And I actually don't know if other folks are trying to do it yet, but we definitely take cuttings every year from our best plants, and we're trying to propagate. I feel like it is a learning curve in terms of being a really good propagator. But we're working with those and then planting them as new plants. The woman I work with, Camila, she'll be using Mezcal selection from our vineyards, which is pretty exciting when she plants her vineyard land that she just closed on. So yes, it exists. But I think at this I think probably in most regions that are at the stage where we are, that's one more thing to think about that people aren't ready to think about. And we have a really good nursery here in the state that I think he's probably supplying most of the country with the varieties that we grow here for other locations who want to grow these same varieties. So he's a really good nursery person. He does a beautiful job, and most people just work with him. There are also a couple of people in upstate New York that people work with. But I love this idea of Mezcal selection and, trying to work with that and see what we can do with it. Yeah.
Pascaline, you said that the age of the vineyards that you're working with is pretty old. Are they in good condition? Are these vines in good condition? Or are they going to need to be, turned over soon and replanted?
So we can only guess how old is the vineyard, because it was from the moment that the current family, when they bought it in 1971, they were told it was at least 80 years old. We need to understand that the pruning system used there is very different than the traditional pruning system you can think for Vinis vinifera, and basically because of the winter damage, they are regrowing canes every single year. So this is a very specific pruning technique that also go back to this idea that terroir is just way more than a geological pathway, and there is also a whole cultural aspect about how to grow specific plants and specific species of vitis depending on your climate. So we are not talking about the same issues of wood disease and all this kind of other things. Like the vineyard is healthy. Like I always have a hard time of the ton to acre versus the hectoliter per hectare. Like I just can't make my head go through that. But the vineyard we're working with is definitely on a higher side of the yielding thing. So no, they do well. Not the only thing is I know that a lot of Delaware has been uprooted from the Finger Lakes, so Delaware is really getting rarer and rarer. So we think we're gonna. Nathan just closed on a piece of land. So in the future, we may just want to plant Delaware just to protect it and to get some. And yes, absolutely for selection master and we go back with this idea that there is not only a genotype, but there is a phenotype. I think it's as a plant and the vine is growing in a certain type of environment, like us, this plant is developing and this vine is developing very interesting specificities that needs to be carried on. And some of these specificities are going to be at one point modifying the DNA of a certain aspect of the vine. There is so many studies about that today. That is absolutely fascinating. So. The clonal selection in France is showing the limit today. In fact, clonal was done to fight against viruses, and there was really major issue with a couple of viruses, and this is why they made very insane amount of clonal selection to realize that in fact other viruses are coming on it, because when you don't give the vine a certain ability and you kind of basically by selecting too much, you are decreasing the immune system. It's like us. And so the maximum diversity and biodiversity is a requirement. We are seeing it for rootstock. The big problem, we were talking about rootstock earlier, but today there is zero diversity in rootstocks. And one of the big problems in Europe are led to the lack of biodiversity. So it's not black and white for sure. It's way complex. But the vine, the vine is very generous. I can tell you these old vines they are doing very well.
Oh, good.
And with just once again, like the family is treating, they just use a tiny bit of copper and that's it. We're talking about 2 treatments a year maximum. So, the idea with hybrids, and we had some question about climate change and all this question of hybrids can be the future for certain type of disease and with the genetics of it and modifying it and the Pierce disease and other diseases in Europe. It's, as we all know, is a multifactorial thing. The intersectionality works also for any living organism.
Right.
And sometimes just the analytical point of view of how we think about living organisms is very problematic. Leads us in a hole, like for everything else.
Thank you. Adrienne, I hate to put you in the hot chair, in the hot seat, but I have one question I want to bring up before we go to Q&A, because I think it's important. It's hard for women like us, because I think that we were all sort of geeks in school and we could just do the deep dive and talk about the empirical part all the time. But we've got to really force ourselves to start talking more about people, culture, labor, community. And I would think, Adrienne, that where you are is very interesting, that not only do you have a lot of different types of people there demographically, but you're also on the border of Mexico. And what does the production community look like there? Do you think it represents the diversity of the people that live in that region?
Yes and no. Labor has actually surprisingly been pretty hard to find for our area, both in vineyard and winery side. That's starting to shift as Texas is gaining more traction and getting a little bit more attention. Folks are coming to our area looking for work, but we're kind of just at that point of seeing that movement. That was something that was really surprising to me when I moved back here, was that there is a really huge struggle to find labor where we are. Again, both in the vineyard and the winery. So it has not been very diverse. And then again, we're just sort of starting to see that shift. That truly was like one of the most surprising things to me when I moved back.
Yeah, I mean, I know, and Erin knows, we struggle with this in Virginia. I'm a little horrified about it in Virginia because I feel like there is a real debt to pay agriculturally down there. And it breaks my heart that we really don't have any African American winemakers down there at this moment. But we can keep working and keep trying. Deirdre, it's a little different. You're in Vermont, so it's a slightly different.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's progressive enough that, and our wine community is small enough that I feel like for our size, we actually have the beginnings of a fair amount of diversity, which is really exciting. I mean, we've got a whole third wave of new young producers that are coming in, either moving here or, from away or coming home. And, it's incredibly diverse, and that is very exciting. And I think that,
and also thanks to you mentoring as well.
Well, I mean, what else are you going to do? It's important to, everybody gets an opportunity, right? That's important. And we want to see all kinds of people being part of our community, even though we have, I mean, Vermont is a very white state, but that's changing, and that is, there's a lot of work being done to create spaces that are comfortable for other people coming in and, really enriching what is going on here. And I am very thankful for that because it makes it interesting. Good place to be.
I do want to say that if anybody's watching out there that is seriously interested in production, and when I say serious, I mean serious. I mean, it's really hard work, and it's very physical, and you spend a lot of time cleaning. But reach out to us. That's the only way. If you're interested, you've got to just make the ask. Don't wait, because it's better to do when you're younger too.
Really quickly, and I think this is very relevant to what we're doing right now, but there was a Women in Wine conference in Austin 2 years ago, and incredible conference, and a lot of women came up to me and other winemakers. They're showing a lot of interest in production, and honestly, since that conference, I've seen quite a few women enter Texas wine scene via like production and on the vineyard side, and so that has been really exciting. And I think it was in huge part thanks to the Women in Wine conference that occurred.
Wow. Yeah, you got to see it to be it.
Yeah, we have the majority of people making wine in Vermont are women at this juncture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Utopia.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing. So that's great, Adrienne. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to get to some of the Q&A. I'll try to get to as many as I can. First, Elizabeth is in Texas. Elizabeth Mears. She's opening a natural wine shop where most of her clientele will have no idea what natural wine means. Adrienne, do you have any tips for her? Meeting her clientele where they are.
I think a really great way to sort of open up the doors to talking about natural wine is talk about food. Everyone eats, and so many people are interested in right now in where their food is coming from, how it's grown. And I think that's a really good way to open the door to talking about natural wine. Encouraging your clientele to start asking those same questions that they ask about food, applying that to the wines that they're drinking as well. And I've posed that question quite a few times, and you really kind of see the light bulb go off for people. They're like, oh, wait, yeah, why am I not questioning that? I mean, wine is a food product.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice.
Okay, another question I have is, Orsi particularly interested in how hybrids behave during fermentation in terms regarding volatility. I don't know, Deirdre or Pascaline or Erin, if you want to speak to this a little bit. She's, I think it's a she, particularly interested in methanol production. But do hybrids operate differently in terms of VA volatility and those types of compounds? Or is it the same things that we struggle with vinifera? Is it the same sort of rudiments?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I haven't really worked with vinifera, except for, the first couple of years that I was making wine in my bathtub. and that wasn't enough to really be able to understand that element. But it's never struck me as being something different than working with vinifera in terms of those aspects. I don't know, Erin, Pascaline, do you guys have a different view of that?
Pascaline, you want to add anything there in terms of volatility and hybrids? But I suspect you're going to tell me all the hybrids are also different.
How the hybrids are so different.
Yes.
Voila.
No, but it's listen for chëpìka, and I'm once again Nathan is making the wine, so I'm there for harvest and then for disgorgement and stuff like that. But Nathan is overlooking the winemaking side. With the two grapes we're working with, fermentation is extraordinarily fast. We're using spontaneous ferments, no prem of VA, no prem of any kind of other compound. The methylene phytate is a very specific compound aromatic for Katuba. We don't have that much because of the way we are picking the grapes. So far, so my experience with hybrids according to Nathan, we have no problem of that. So once again, hybrids, we're not talking about one. Like if you have a 97, 99% DNA vitis vinifera, it's not the same thing that if you have a Labrusca at 97%. So it's just weight of
or to remind people of that the fact that there's several different families of American grapes that can be part of a multivitis. It's not just Labrusca, it's Estivales, it's the Muscadine family. There's many groups of many different genetic strains here. I mean, I know in Virginia sometimes we talk about Chambourcin, and how funny the tannins are there. Like nothing I've ever heard. That essentially the tannins drop out, the color stays, the tannins drop out immediately, and it just creates, a really unique wine that you don't really see in other grape varieties that you can compare it to. Erin, you want to jump in?
Personally, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I tend to associate VA with volatility with production methods and styles more so than grape varieties. That's where it comes out to me, and particularly with anything pasito or made with dried grapes, like I always get a lot of it there. So usually when I smell it, I start asking questions about how it was made. And I don't, like in my mind, I don't link it so much to grape variety as much as how it's made, personally.
Yeah. I mean, I know, the way that Ben is making the hybrids he works with at either Lightwell Survey, Early Mountain, or his family project called Midland Construction. I think he is very cognizant that because these are grapes that people don't know as well, he tends, I think, to make them in a slightly cleaner way. As to sort of bridge the gap. So yeah, I think look, it's early days. We all have a lot to learn, but I think vinification methods are going to be as important as hybrid, particularities. But we'll see. We'll find out more. Okay, let's move on. Oh yeah, this is fun. Deirdre, you want to tell us a little bit more about your Rancio?
Oh, why, yes. I'd love to. Well, the Rancio started, it goes back as far as 2014. And this kind of ties in a little bit to the previous question in, sometimes you've got to follow what the wine wants to do. And I think regardless of the variety, it's really about the season, and it's about telling that story of the season. So, for example, in 2014, I had some La Crescent that would normally have gone into a wine we call Vinu Yanku, which is a skin fermented wine, but it didn't embody that wine. It was going in a different direction, which at the time, I wasn't really sure what that was. So I set it aside and said, let's just see what happens, see where it wants to go, if it's going to go anywhere. And, several years later, when Camila, who I work with, came on board, and I asked her, so what kinds of wine do you love? You know, what do you want to make? What are you interested in? What do you want to study? And she said sherry. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. So let's think about wines made in that style, that are oxidative style. So we tasted through all of these vessels that we had from 2014 and 15 that didn't quite fit the personality of the wines I thought they were going to be. And we chose one, an Alpine Solera, and then we chose other ones for the Rancio. So the Rancio, we put in glass demijohns, and we put them out in the Rose Garden, which is on a pea stone. So it gets very warm, a lot of sunshine there. And they're out there for, 3 to 5 months while the weather is good. And we just let them sit. And then they come in for the winter because it's too cold outside to let the glass be out there. And then they go out again. So this will actually be the first, this year will be the first release of Rancio made from 14, 15, 16, and 17, I believe. So that's super exciting. We have 4 wines in this project that Camila and I are doing. And yeah, we can't wait to share them with everyone.
Fantastic. And the last thing I'd like to ask all of you, also a question that was in the Q&A, where are you finding your inspiration in terms of the emergence kind of theme we have going here, in terms of who is working in an emerging region in the United States that you're super inspired by right now, or learning a lot from right now? And even better if it's a woman. Tell us what you're excited about right now. Anyone go?
So excited about what's happening in Vermont. Deirdre, I've been following your project for a while. It's been really cool seeing Camilla release her wines. I very much hope to try those someday. And y'all are just really paving the way for hybrids. I mean, I would love to see more hybrids done in Texas, especially hybrids that are going to be resistant to Pierce's disease, and then be able to hold up a lot more against powdery and downy mildew. So keep up the great work. And I really hope to come visit very soon now that things are.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Before we go to the next person, Adrienne, your private project, which is called Lightsome.
Yes.
Can you just tell me briefly, what are some of the things you make through Lightsome that are a little different than what you would be doing at Southold?
Yeah, that's a great question. My production for Lightsome, I should say, it's very small right now. And I am one of the winemakers at Southold alongside Regan. So I definitely try to do things a little bit different with Lightsome. I've started doing a little bit more co-ferments, which has been a lot of fun. So this last release was a co-ferment of Mourvedre and a little bit of Muscat Blanc. That's something I'd like to continue doing with Lightsome. I think it makes a lot of sense in Texas to be co-fermenting whites and reds. I think you get this interesting phenolic character because you're getting you're pushing the ripeness a little bit on the whites, but then picking your reds early, and it gives you a nice balance of acidity as well. So that's something I'd like to keep doing with Lightsome, just be a little bit more experimental, think a little bit out of the box.
Great. Erin, what's your inspiration these days?
My inspiration is it's a whole emergence of not just wine but food also in Virginia. There's these really cool oyster farms in the Chesapeake Bay area that are coming up and making them literally. I've had these oysters and I feel like they're intoxicating in some way. It's the craziest thing. Soft shell crabs are from the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and those have really come into their own thing in the last 30 years. And so watching the wine and the apples and the cider and the beer all come up along with the food together, to me, that's where I pull a lot of inspiration from. And then I also have been thinking a lot in the last 5 years or so about how we spend our money. And I'm talking about, you know, if you're a buyer for a restaurant or a wine shop, or just how we spend our personal money. I think if we all pushed that money, like really spent it consciously and pushed it towards women winemakers and just in support, like eventually there will be a shift in power and things will change in a very special way. Like I can feel it happening already. So I also try to look at companies that I buy from, like importers and stuff. I try to find out where they're headquartered, who the owners are, and I try to favor ones that are headquartered locally, or like just sort of thinking like an extra layer into the company of how like money flows from one place to another. And it sounds like very economical, but really what it is I want to send money towards where I'm inspired, you know? Like I try to vote with dollars, especially in a restaurant setting, especially if anyone here listening might have some buying power in a restaurant setting or a wine shop setting. Like if you vote with your dollars, eventually, and you support producers who are making cool things, who are using indigenous yeast or whatever, you know, in your area that you can support, eventually, like you're telling part of the story with what you're buying, and they see it on the sales sheets. And an economy goes hand in hand with activism in a way. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
So yeah, that economy.
A+. Pascaline, what's inspiring you? Before I lose you again, what's inspiring you in terms of the work that you're doing with these beautiful grape varieties in the Finger Lakes?
If you're just talking about the pure work of hybrids, well, of course Deirdre, but Deirdre. I had some contact with people in Canada, with the people from Benjamin Bridge, especially because they're able to scale up to another level. Because I think one of the things that we are facing in South Park, the chëpìka project, is very, very small and tiny. And I think at one point we need to think about how to go to the next level in terms of production without losing the integrity of the production itself. So do we have to multiply the project? We have a lot of small projects that can gather and build a certain amount of a community or system you can sell. And Benjamin Bridge and the team over there and Benoit Delaurier has been recreating some really good sparkling pet nut with hybrids, low price, in can, with a certain idea of sustainability. So I'm very interested into the logistic of that. How can we scale up to the next level without losing the compromission and all that? Because it's great to have ideal, but it's also important to give access to a certain level of production without losing what is the core and at a certain price point. So the logistic aspect. And on more the production side, we are listening a lot to what Mimi is doing. The Mimi Castile, of course, has been such a strong voice, forward thinking into the regenerative farming and how to apply it over there. Matt Taylor is doing the same thing in California down. And then all the new projects are really.
Pascaline, who did you say in California?
Matt Taylor.
Matt Taylor
is on the Sonoma coast area, so maybe a non-emerging region. But what he's doing is very unique for the site over there. And then I'm listening to the evolution of the question of the labor and education. It's a big one. Our project is too small. Nathan is doing everything by himself, but the Finger Lakes is a complicated area. So it's not easy when you come from the outside and when there is history. So how do you make the change there? So a lot of good stuff are happening in California and showing the way. So bravo for that.
Thank you.
We need to say bye to everybody. I'm so sorry. Like I really have to go back.
That's okay. We're not going to be here when you come back. They're going to move on to cider and co-fermentation.
I'm gonna bye guys.
Thank you, love.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Deirdre, last but not least, where are you finding your inspiration from these days?
Yes, certainly. I'll piggyback on Pascaline mentioning Mimi Castile. She's somebody who definitely inspires me every day. And that's not necessarily an emerging region, but I think about her a lot and what she's doing. But really, it's the two women I work with, Camila and Willa. And they both are so passionate and interested in their own personal projects in addition to the work that they do with me, that I'm kind of amazed and agog at what they're up to. You know, Willa is doing all these really interesting co-fermentations. She works with me on the cider and piquette side of what we're doing, and she's, you know, experimenting all the time. She's just been working with violets, and now she's doing a project with rhubarb, and, you know, trying to figure out kind of the next steps for her own project. And certainly Camila, she's just released into the wider world she's been producing for 3 years, but more people are getting an opportunity to taste what she's doing. And excuse me, she's got these wonderful Solera sherry projects that I find immensely inspiring. So I'm very glad to have the two of them around me so that I can be.
That's a real blessing.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here and for being my co-pilots through this discussion and conversation. I know that it's time to wrap this up because my dog is now here and she's ready for her supper. And I just want to thank our sponsor, who was actually the Vineyards. The Vineyards is actually the foundational organization behind Wine Fair. And they are the ones who created the wine equity industry, the Wine Industry Equity Pledge. And also working on a documentary film about natural women in the natural wine sector. And the next panel that's coming up is going to be at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be on ciders and co-ferments. So that's the next thing up. But let's just, you know, consider this the beginning, and we'll keep this conversation going. And any of you all that are out there, reach out to us directly if you have any more questions, if there's anything that we need to clarify, and we'll get you the information. Everybody here, I know that everybody's on this panel is very accessible and happy to help. So let us help. Let us be accessible to you. Okay. Anyway, love you all. Thank you so much. I can't wait to
Thank
see you.
you.
To all of you.
And I'll see you all soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Much love.